We continue now at the top of Daf Kufay Amid Beis in Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 105b. On the previous Amid, the Gemara brought in Machlokas Tanoim. If something is metame tumah chamura, meaning it's metame adam and begadim, so in such a situation, is it automatically metame ochlim umashkin? An example of this would be by the nevela of an oftar, let's say of the carcass of a kosher bird. That's metame tumah chamura, because as we know, it's metame bebeis habliya. When the person swallows it, it causes tumah, and so therefore it's metame ochlin umashkin. But there was a machlokas tanoim in terms of whether it's automatically metame ochlin umashkin, or at least it has to be something that is chazi latuma, that is fit for tumah. Rabbi Meir said that if it's metame tumah chamura, it's automatically metame ochlin umashkin, and the Rabbanan said no, it also has to have at least has to satisfy the stipulation of being chazi latuma. And so the Gemara asks, within Rabbi Meir, we know that the amount, the shear that it's metame bebeis habliya by nivlas oftar is a kazayis, and so the question is, according to Rabbi Meir, that we say automatically there's going to be a tumas ochlin umashkin, it's metame ochlin umashkin, is that going to happen at the shear of a kazayis, or no, do we say you need the regular shear of a kabetza? And again, that's a question only within Rabbi Meir, and the Gemara said that question is specifically only in a situation where the person is actually holding the nivlas oftar, because that's already considered close enough that he's going to be swallowing it, that it's considered, again, it's going to be metame tumah chamura. And the Gemara now continues with Rav Chia bar Abba's answer. Rav Chia bar Abba says, mechusar kreva lav ke mechusar ma'isa dami. If it's lacking being close, meaning again it's in the person's hand, but it's not actually in his mouth, that's not missing any action. And so therefore, Rav Chia bar Abba is saying that yes, in fact, it would be metame ochlin umashkin, even at the shear of a kazayis. And the Gemara continues, Esvei, we have a question on this from a Mishnah in Meseches Taharos. The Mishnah says, Shalosha asar devarim namru benivlas oftar. There are 13 things that are said by the nevela of a kosher bird. V'zeh echad mehen, and this is one of them. Tzricha machshava, it needs machshava, it needs intent. V'yein tzricha hechsher, it doesn't need hechsher, it doesn't need preparation. U'mitame tumas ochlin b'kebetza, and it's also mitame tumas ochlin, and here it says b'kebetza, not b'kezayis. And the Gemara says, my love, is it not Rabbi Meir? Isn't this Rabbi Meir? And so therefore this would go against what we just said. Here we're saying that according to Rabbi Meir, you do need the shear of a kabetza. It needs to be the shear of an egg. A kazayis is not enough. And the Gemara says, lo, no, Rabbanan. Here it's according to the Rabbanan. According to the Rabbanan, there never was any question, and certainly you would need a kabetza. And Rashi explains tzricha machshava. What does it mean that it needs to have machshava intent? Rashi says it means lehitztaref pachos mikazayis mimena. It means that we're combining less than a kazayis from it. Lahashlim pachos mikabetza ochlin, to complete by less than a kabetza of ochlin, of food. Lakabel tumas ochlin b'maga, that it can receive tumas ochlin b'maga. Essentially, what Rashi seems to be saying over here is that we are combining the nivlas oftar with ochel in order to make a kabetza, in order to receive tumah. However, we should note that Rabbi Akiva Eger says, tzricha machshava letzdarif pachos mikazayis kashali, it's difficult. Amai lo kipshuta, why not just explain the Mishnah according to the simple explanation? That tzarech machshava, there needs to be intention. The al yedezeh yesh lo tumas atzmo, through the intention, it has its own tumah. Latame ochlin umashkin, in order to be matame, food and drink. Kevon desofo latame tumah chamura, again based on the logic that in the end, since it's able to be matame tumah chamura, which again is tumas adam v'kelim, so there needs to be some kind of machshava for tumas ochlin umashkin. Uvenida be'emes lo kasav Rashi Kain in Meseches. Neither Rashi actually doesn't write what he writes over here about, again, combining. You have pachas mikazayis mimena lahashlim pachas mikabetza. That he doesn't write in Meseches Nida. In any case, Rashi continues, ve'ena tzricha hechsher. The next halach it said in the Mishnah is it doesn't need hechsher. Latame, it doesn't need any hechsher to cause tumah. Lo lamayim v'lo lamagosheretz, meaning it doesn't need to have any hechsher that it touches water. It doesn't need to touch a sheretz. As we said in the previous summit, shemei eleo metame, meaning automatically on its own, it's able to be metame. Hoel v'sofa latame tumah chamura. With the same logic we said in the previous summit, something that in the end is metame tumah chamura can be metame ochlin and mashkin automatically. And Rashi continues, "Umetame tumas ochlin b'kebetza." Again, it's metame food b'kebetza. Midiktani tzricha machshava ve'ena tzricha hechsher. Now, from the fact that it says over here machshava intention is required and hechsher preparation is not required, alma b'dinoked le b'yodei askin. And Rashi says you already see that we're talking about the same scenario that we've been discussing, where it's actually in his hand. The imachta ara, because if it was on the ground, amai ena tzricha hechsher. Why wouldn't it require hechsher? In that case, we would say it requires hechsher. V'dinoked le and if it's in his mouth, why would intention be needed? We don't have any greater intention than that. And again, v'katani kebetza in kazayis lo, and it says a kebetza is the amount that's necessary, not a kazayis. So essentially, Rashi is saying that from the fact that it says over here that it is tzricha machshava ve'ena tzricha hechsher, that shows that we're kind of in this middle situation. It's not yet in the person's mouth, it's not on the ground, it's in his hand, and so therefore in such a situation, again, it's saying that the shear is a kebetza. And the Gemara continues and says, how can you say that this Mishnah is the Rabbanan and not Rabbi Meir? V'hakatani reisha, but it says in the beginning of the Mishnah, as we saw, tzricha machshava, that intention is necessary. Ve'ein tzricha hechsher, and hechsher is not necessary. Preparation for the tum is not necessary. Uman shamat lehai svara, who's the one that holds of that? Rabbi Meir, that's Rabbi Meir. Umidereisha Rabbi Meir, and from the fact that the beginning is Rabbi Meir, seifa nami Rabbi Meir, wouldn't that mean that the end of the Mishnah is also Rabbi Meir? The kebetza part of the Mishnah is also Rabbi Meir. And the Gemara says, Midi Iriya, is that necessarily true? Ha-kedisa, it's possible that one part of the Mishnah is Rabbi Meir and the other part of the Mishnah is the Rabbanan. And we will take a look over here as well at Rabbi Akiva Eger, the Gilin Ashas, Uman Shamatle, Rabbi Meir. Who's the one that holds of this? It's Rabbi Meir, as opposed to the Rabbanon. Yesh La'ayin, we have to understand this. Hamaskin and La'el, we said earlier, the Gamla Rabbanon, Sfir Lo Ketana de Rabbi Shmuel. Fundamentally, the Rabbanon and Rabbi Meir really agree with the idea that if in the end there's Tumah Chamur, it's Matame Ochlin Umashkin. Again, as we said, the only machlokus really is whether it has to be chazi, whether it has to be fit. V'rak Besar HaMishtaleach Lo, is only by the Sar HaMishtaleach that they disagree. Kavan de Lo chazi bi'alma l'kabel tumah. That's a living animal, and so it's in general not fit to receive tumah. And so therefore, why would we say that this is only Rabbi Meir, meaning this part of the Mishnah, which talks about the fact of tzricha machshava and ein tzricha hechsher, that is only Rabbi Meir and not the Rabbanan? Rabbi Akiva Eger says that needs understanding. But in any case, again, the Gemara had asked if that part is Rabbi Meir, so wouldn't that mean the end is Rabbi Meir? And the Gemara says not necessarily. And the Gemara continues, v'hamidiktani seifa, but from the fact that it says at the end of the Mishnah, shchitasa u'malika, it says by a bird that the slaughtering, this is talking about a bird that's a carbon, if you slaughter it or you do malika, you pinch the neck, mitaheres treifasa mitumasa, that would purify it from having the tumah. Let's say it was a treif, it was found to have a mortal wound. Now that line, this was mentioned earlier in the Masechta, man shamat lehai svar, who holds of that? That's Rabbi Meir, that we also know as Rabbi Meir. So again, a similar question, reisha v'sefer Rabbi Meir, u'mitziasa Rabbanan, are we going to say the beginning and the end of this mission is Rabbi Meir, and the middle part is the Rabbanan? Does that make sense? And the Gemara says, in yes, Reisha v'sefer Rabbi Meir, we'll say the beginning and the end of this Mishnah is Rabbi Meir, u'mitzias Rabbanan, and again, the middle part of the Mishnah, which says kibetza, that is the Rabbanan. And Rashi explains, Hachi Garsinan, this is the proper text, Shchitasum u'likasum and taheres treifasum mitumasa, hai svar Rabbi Meir, that line in the Mishnah is Rabbi Meir. Rashi says, Beperek Chatas Of, this was earlier in Perek Chatas Of, that we said that line in that Mishnah is Rabbi Meir. And the Gemara continues, Amar le Rav Hamnuna le Rabbi Zeir. Rav Hamnuna said to Rabbi Zeir, Lo teisev akarach, don't sit down, ada amrit li hamilsa, until you tell me the following, Nivlas oftar, when it comes again to the Nivlas oftar, le Rabbi Meir, according to Rabbi Meir, again we're saying this Nivlas oftar is metame ochlin umashkin. So monin lo rishon v'sheni, when we talk about the tumas ochlin umashkin, do we count it rishon and sheni? O ein monin rishon v'sheni, or is it not rishon v'sheni? Meaning to say, is it metame the ochlin that they're going to be a sheni, or is it even rishon as well? That's essentially the question over here. Rashi explains, Nivlas oftar le Meir d'metame tumas ochlin meila bekazayis. Again, we're saying that the Nivlas oftar, even when it's just a kazayis, is metame food. Monin bo rishon v'sheni olo. Is that going to be counted as rishon and sheni or not? And the Gemara continues, Amar Lei said back to him, Kol heicha de metame adam b'maga, any situation where something is metame a person by touching the person, then monin bo rishon v'sheni, then we say there can be rishon and sheni. But kol heicha de ein metame adam b'maga, but something that cannot be metame a person through touching, ein monin bo rishon v'sheni, there we say there is no rishon and sheni. And Rashi explains, Kol heicha de la metame adam b'maga, ein monin bo rishon v'sheni, means as follows. De gamar mi sheretz, we're learning from sheretz. T'chsiv bei minyan rishon v'sheni. It's really by a sheretz, which is an avatuma, that you can have a rishon and a sheni. A sheretz can cause something to be a rishon, which can then cause something to be a sheni. T'chsiv, as it's written, kol asher b'socho yitma, anything within it is tameh. There it was talking about a sheretz there within this vessel. T'havale hakli rishon, the vessel is a rishon, that's a first degree tuma. Va'ochel sheni, and then the food then becomes a sheni, so that's rishon and sheni. V'nivlas oftar lo metame adam b'maga, and nivlas oftar, it is metame, again, a person that's bebeis habliya, it has that kind of tumah, but not by touching a person, and therefore there's no rishon and sheni in this situation. It's able to make the food a sheni, but there is no situation of rishon, again, by nivlas of tahar. And the Gemara continues, Boy minei Rabbi Zera me Rabbi Ami bar Chia. Rabbi Zera asked Rabbi Ami bar Chia, V'Amri and some say me Rabbi Avin bar Kahana. He asked Rabbi Avin bar Kahana. Hadetnan, that which we learned in a Mishnah. Some here have the gears of the Tanya that we learned in a Brisa. Chibure ochlin al yedei mashkin, when you have an attachment or a combination of food through a liquid. Chibor l'toma kala ve'ein chibor l'toma chamura. That's considered an attachment or a combination as far as a more lenient kind of tuma, but not the stricter tuma. And we have a similar question over here. Monin bo rishon v'sheni. Do we count rishon and sheni? Oein monin bo rishon v'sheni. Or we don't count rishon v'sheni. And he gave the same answer. Amar le said to him, Kol echad de metame adam. Anytime when it could be metame a person, monin bo rishon v'sheni, then we count rishon and sheni. Ein metame adam. If it's not metame a person, ein monin bo rishon v'sheni, then we do not count rishon and sheni. And Rashi explains, Chibure ochlin al yedei mashkin is the following situation. Chatzi zayis nevela mikan. Let's say you have a half a zayis of nevela over here. V'chatzi zayis nevela mikan, and half zayis of nevela over here. Umashke tofach bemsa, and then you have a liquid that's in the middle. V'nogea b'shneim, it's touching both of them. Mechabron, so then it can attach them to make a shear. Latame ochlin umashkin hanogim be'echon min hachatzoin elu. That now, if it touches food or drink touches one of these halves, then there is going to be tumah. Ve'ein chibor l'tumah chamura. Now that combination works for ochlin and mashkin, but not for tumah chamura, meaning latame adam v'kelim. It does not work to make people or to make vessels tameh. Rashi says v'taim lo yadana. I don't know why this is the case that we make this distinction in terms of the chibor. But again, the question was, are we mona rishon and sheni or not? And the answer was essentially we are not. We just say it makes a sheni because since it's not metame adam, we say ein monin rishon v'sheni. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Yotzu elu ve'elu, when everybody leaves the Azara. Again, this is talking about taking the Parim HaNisrafim and the Sirim HaNisrafim outside of the Azara. So once those Kohanim leave the Azara, then they become Tameh. And the Gemara says, Minohani Mili, from where do we know this? Titanu Rabbanon, because the rabbis taught, the sages taught in a Brisa. Lahalon hu omer chutz l'gimel machanos. Further on it says outside of 3 camps. And kan l'machana achas, here it says 1 camp. Lomar loch, that's to say to you, to tell you, kevan sheyotza chutz l'machana achas, once it goes out of 1 camp, meaning the Azara, metame begadim. Then it's metame begadim, it's metame garments. And Rashi explains, Hachi garsinan lahalon aton nosein lahem shalosh machanos. Further on, we give them 3 camps. V'kan machana achas, and here 1 camp. Imkein laman emer el michutz lamachane. If so, why does it say el michutz lamachane? Lomar loch, it's to say to you, kevan sheyotza chutz lamachane achas metame begadim. Once they leave 1 machane, it's metame begadim. V'ami tanya b'toras kohanim. Now this is from a Brisa in Toras Kohanim. Gabe par Yom HaKippurim, and it's in reference to the par of Yom Kippur. T'chsiv, it's written, ves parachatos, ves sirachatos asher huva. It says you have the parachatos, the sirachatos. The komitam eton of Yomar. Now the Tan is asking the following question. Lahalon bepar ho'eda v'koin Mashiach. Further on, by the par ho'eda, the communal par, and the par of the koin gadol. Aton nosein lohem mokom sreifasin. Where are you supposed to burn those? That's chutz l'shalosh machanos. You're supposed to burn them outside of all 3 camps, essentially outside of Yerushalayim. Kediyolaf l'kamei, like we'll learn it later on. V'kana to Omer, and here we're saying el michutz lamachan. It says outside the camp, v'sarfu, and burn it. Demashmash sarfan chutz la'azara. It sounds like you burn it right outside the courtyard. Miyad b'harabayis, immediately by harabayis. V'halo af elu penimim, but aren't these also, when we're talking about these karbanos, talks about the par Yom HaKippurim again, ves parachatos, ves sirachatos. These are also inner karbanos. Va'aisi lakulu ki adadi biribuya dechatos achatos, and we include them all similarly with an inclusion of, it says achatos, b'shili kol azvachim, v'yomar nami b'perak beishamai, lapar ze par Yom HaKippurim. We also say earlier in perak beishamai that lapar is referring to the par Yom HaKippurim. And Rashi continues, Imkein lamanemar el michutz lamachan. Again, if so, if it talked about 3 machanos, why does it say michutz lamachane? Le'inyan tumas begodim. That's as far as the garments becoming tamei. Techsivi bekrod basrei koamar el michutz lamachane v'hasorei fosam yechavis begodim. It says el michutz lamachane, the one who burns them will wash his garments. And lomar loch, that's to say to you, to tell you, kevan sheyotzu chutz la'azara. Once they leave the azara, just 1 machane, hamisaskin behind those who are dealing with them with this procedure, with this process. Metam and begadim, so then their garments are going to be tameh. So again, even though the burning takes place, the makom sreifas, and the location of the burning is outside 3 machanos, but the tumah happens outside of 1 machana. And the Gemara continues, V'hi gufa minola, now that itself, from where do we know? Meaning, from where do we know that it's burned outside of the three machanos? We'll note over here again the difference in the girsa and Rashi earlier. The way we had the girsa was lahalan hu omer. Further on it says chutz legimel machanos, but Rashi's girsa was lahalan atanosein lahem shalosh machanos. Later we're going to say that it's three machanos, and now the Gemara wants to know the source for that. And the Gemara says the Tana Rabbanon, that the sages taught in a brisa, v'hotzi es kol hapar el michutz lamachane. It says you take the bull outside the machane, chutz legimel machanos. It means outside of three camps, of all three camps, meaning outside of Yerushalayim. Atzomer chutz legimel machanos, you're saying it's outside of the three camps, so eino elo machane achas, maybe it's just outside of one camp. Kishu omer b'par ha'eda, when it says by the communal bull, michutz lamachane, it says outside the camp. She'ein sarach lomar, doesn't need to say that. Sharei kvar nemar, because it already says, kasher saraf es hapar harishon, it says as you burn the first par, so litein lo machane shniya, that already gives a second camp. The second camp means to say outside of Harabayis. Kishu omer michutz lamachane b'deshen, and when it says outside the camp by the ashes, she'ein sarach lomar, didn't need to say that. Sharei kvar nemar al shefech hadeshen yisoref, it already says al shefech hadeshen yisoref, litein lo machane shlishis, that's the source for the third camp. And Rashi explains, Michutz lamachane b'deshen, it says outside of the camp by the ashes, b'hotzoas deshen hamizbeach, by taking the ashes of the mizbeach out, v'hotzias hadeshen al michutz lamachane, it says you'll take it outside the camp. Shein Talmud lomar, ein melamed klum, it's not teaching anything. Da'anoya da'ana del michutz lamachane motziono, so we already know you take it outside the camp. T'chsiv b'param hanisrafim, because it says by the param hanisrafim, el shefech hadeshen, it says to the area of the ashes. Uchsiv b'hu el michutz, and it says al michutz, we already know it, so these are extra psukim, and that's why they're saying it's outside of the three camps. And the Gemara continues and asks, Rabbi Shimon, hai michutz lamachane ma'avidle, what does Rabbi Shimon do with michutz lamachane? And Rashi explains, Rabbi Shimon, Damar v'masnis, and Rabbi Shimon, who says in our Mishnah, ein mitamin begodim ad sheyutzas ha'or berubo, he says that the tumas begodim happens when the fire takes hold of the majority, again by the param hanisrafim and the sirim hanisrafim. So hai michutz lamachane, so the pasuk of michutz lamachane, dechsib bepar v'sor shel yom kippurim, which is written by the bull and the he-goat of Yom Kippur, ma'avidle, what does he do with that pasuk? Again, we use that to say that the tumah was outside of one machane, but Rabbi Shimon doesn't agree that the tumah takes place when it's taken out of one machane, because he says the tumah takes place when it's yutzas or berubo. So what does he do with michutz lamachane? And the Gemara continues, he needs it for what's taught in the following brisa. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Rabbi Eliezer says, Nemar kan chutz lamachane, it says over here chutz lamachane. V'nemar lahalan chutz lamachane, it says further on chutz lamachane. Ma lahalan chutz legimel machanos, just like over there it's outside of three camps. Afkan chutz legimel machanos, so too over here it's outside of three camps. Uma lahalan lemizracha shel Yerushalayim, just like over there it's to the east of Yerushalayim. And Rashi explains, Nemar kan, it says over here, that's bepar yom hakippurim, that's the bull that's brought on Yom Kippur. V'namar lahalan b'par aduma, and it says over there by par aduma, v'hotzi osel michutz, it says michutz lamachane. Makan b'parim hanisrafim, and we learn as follows. Just like over here by the parim hanisrafim, the bulls that are burned, chutz legimel machanos, that burning takes place outside of the three camps, outside of Yerushalayim. Av shchitas par aduma chutz legimel machanos. So too the slaughtering of the par aduma takes place outside of the three camps. And we will know that the Shinui Nuschos does change the girsa of Rashi to Sreifas, that when it's the Sreifas Paraduma again, so our girsa is Shchitas Paraduma, the Shinui Nuschos brings an alternate girsa of Sreifas Paraduma, the burning of the Paraduma takes place outside of the three Machanos. And Malahalan Beparaduma, and just like over there by the Paraduma, B'mizracho Shal Yerushalayim, it's east of Yerushalayim, Techsibba V'hizal Nochach Pnei Ol Moed, it says towards the Ol Moed, Alma Omed B'mizrachu Panav L'mayrav, you see that he's standing in the east and it faces west. Keneged Pischo Shel Heichel, towards the entrance of the Heichel. Shu Bekosel Mizrachi, which is the east wall. Upischo LeMizrach, and the opening is towards the east. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Kovav Amud Aleph.